In the hush of a late evening, the sting of a crumbling marriage cut through the silence. Candlelight flickered across the dining table as Mark looked at me with eyes I couldn't read. It was his 34th birthday, and I'd poured my soul into crafting a perfect night. His favorite meal, a bottle of deep Merlot, and an evening unmarred by the buzz of our phones. Yet his expression, a blend of uncertainty and weariness, thickened the air more than the wine in my glass. "You've been distant, Claire," he murmured, his fork lying idle beside his plate. "You come home late. Your phone's always close. You smile at texts you hide from me. I don't want to spoil tonight, but I need to know, are you involved with someone else?" His words loomed like a blade above my head. I let out a laugh, too sharp, too strained. "What, Mark? On your birthday, of all nights?" I replied, forcing a smile to mask my unease. Should I say I ran off with a tycoon and returned for the dessert? It was meant as a playful deflection, a way to sidestep the tension. But the instant his face hardened, I realized I'd torn open a wound that had been quietly festering for weeks. Mark pushed his chair back with measured intent. "That's not funny, Claire," he said, his voice low and weighted. "Not when I'm asking in earnest. Not when I already feel you drifting away." In a heartbeat, the birthday celebration turned into the night he walked out. I never thought he'd actually leave. Mark had always been constant, endlessly patient. 7 years of marriage, and he was the kind of man who rarely raised his voice or tossed accusations carelessly. But that night, he grabbed his coat, his keys, and left without a single shout. The silence that followed was stifling. At first, rage consumed me, rage at him for ruining his own birthday, at myself for that reckless quip, at the unease that had been gnawing at our connection for months. Beneath that anger, though, lurked something darker, dread. Because Mark wasn't wrong. It had started 3 months earlier when Dylan joined our advertising firm. Charismatic, sharp-tongued, and effortlessly captivating, he brought a spark to the dull office routine. Mark and I weren't miserable, just worn, our lives dulled by the grind of work, bills, and date nights where we were too tired to talk about anything beyond a leaking faucet or the neighbor's yapping dog. Dylan noticed things Mark hadn't in years. My new perfume, a slight change in my hair, the way I lingered by the coffee machine on Mondays. It began innocently, light-hearted banter over deadlines, shared lunches in the break room, strolling to the parking lot together. But then came the late-night messages, the kind that brought a smile when I should have been asleep beside my husband. I told myself it was harmless, that it meant nothing. Yet guilt crept in, through the way I turned my phone face down, how I shrank from Mark's touch in bed, the quick pang when he asked, "Who's texting you so late?" When Mark didn't come back that night, I called him twice. No answer. By morning, his closet was half empty, and a note lay on the kitchen counter. I didn't want to believe it. I spoke up because I still loved you. But last night, your response told me what I feared. No shouting, no threats, just a quiet, devastating truth. I went to work that day in a fog, my thoughts muddled as I sat across from Dylan in a meeting. He noticed my bloodshot eyes and asked if I was okay. I nodded, forcing a smile, but the weight in my chest was crushing. Suddenly, his attention felt poisonous, not thrilling. Mark didn't return that night or the next. A friend later said he was staying with his brother across town. He hadn't filed for divorce yet, but his silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Days bled into weeks. Mark and I traded brief texts about bills and rent, but nothing about us. I stopped replying to Dylan, stopped laughing at his jokes, stopped checking my phone past midnight because none of it mattered anymore. I wasn't ready to admit I'd broken my marriage for fleeting excitement. But the truth glared at me every time I passed our wedding photo in the hall. The turning point came 2 weeks later at the grocery store. Mark looked tired, thinner, but his eyes were clearer than mine had been in months. "Mark, please," I called as he turned into the dairy aisle. He stopped, hands tight on the cart, but offered no warmth. "Claire, can we talk?" My voice cracked. Shoppers passed by, some glancing, most oblivious, but I felt the weight of the world as I begged. "There's nothing to discuss," he said, his tone calm but cold. "I told you my fears. You didn't take me seriously." "It wasn't like that," I burst out, too loudly. "I didn't sleep with him." A kid in the next aisle chuckled. Mark didn't flinch. "Maybe not, but you mocked my concern. You let someone else into your thoughts, your messages, the space we shared. Do you know how humiliating it is to be laughed at when I was trying to save us?" I opened my mouth, then shut it. I wanted to shout that it was just boredom, just office chatter, that he hadn't been attentive. But deep down, I knew those were excuses. The truth was clear. I'd crossed a line and then laughed it off, expecting him to swallow his pain for the sake of a birthday dinner. "Mark, please, can we try to fix this? Counseling, anything." He shook his head. "I spent months trying to fix it while you were caught up with someone else. I won't plead for your loyalty." He walked away, his cart empty. A month later, the divorce papers arrived. No yelling, no drawn-out legal fights. With no children or shared property, it was just 7 years of memories divided into boxes and signatures. I signed with shaking hands. Dylan reached out a few times afterward, saying he missed our talks, claiming he didn't mean for things to spiral, but his words burned like salt in a wound I'd caused myself. I blocked him, not out of anger, but because I couldn't face the reminder of what I'd traded for nothing. Nights became unbearable, lying in a half-empty bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every choice I could have made differently. Putting the phone down, skipping the extra coffee, listening when Mark said he felt distant, reaching for his hand instead of brushing off his fears. Love doesn't shatter in one blow. It crumbles through neglect, small betrayals, and careless quips at the worst moments. Months later, I saw Mark at a friend's engagement party. He was laughing with a woman I didn't recognize. She touched his arm as she spoke, and he leaned in at ease. He looked lighter, unburdened. He caught my eye across the room and gave a polite nod, no resentment, just closure. That's when it hit me. He hadn't left because of the joke, but because the joke confirmed his deepest fears, that I disregarded the vows we'd made, that my laughter, meant to deflect, had become the admission he needed. If I could go back to that birthday night, I wouldn't pick a finer wine or prepare a grander meal. I'd have set the phone aside months earlier. I'd have met his gaze when he asked his question and confessed I was slipping, that I needed him to ground me, that I wanted only him. But time doesn't bend to regret, it only sharpens it. Now, when people ask why my marriage ended, I tell them the stark truth. I let a fleeting distraction erode my devotion, and a thoughtless laugh shattered what was already fragile.